Welcome into the latest edition of the Unpaid Interns. My name is Austin Render. It is Friday, June 5th. My co-host, or supposed to be co-host, Griffin Gonzalez, has had some issues with the internet. Shout out internet companies. They're still getting that installed at his place, so it will just be me here for a couple of minutes before we bring in some really nice guests today. We have Matt Cohen coming in from Washington, D.C. He is our guy, or loves Washington, D.C., I should say. And then Galen Clavio, our IU student media program leader, will join us at about 11:30. So we have a lot of great stuff planned for today. And until then, let's kind of get things started here with the headlines of the day. The MLB still butting heads a little bit. The players and the owners cannot seem to agree on what the heck they are going to do with this season. There were obviously the players tried to pass the 114 game proposal. That didn't work. And then now the player or the owners want a 50 game season. This was from Jeff Passan yesterday. Major League Baseball made official what was expected, informally rejecting the MLB Players Association 114 game proposal. MLB is not countering, which brings the possibility of implementing a 50 game season into play. And then following that, in an MLB PA board meeting today, the Executive Council player representatives remain steadfast in turning down any further salary reductions, said MLB PA Executive Director Tony Clark in a statement. The league's demand for additional concessions was resoundingly rejected. So it's kind of, but the owners still want the pay cuts for the players. The players don't want the pay cuts. The games may not be the biggest deciding factor. It's really about the money. And it's a little disappointing for those of us who would just like to see baseball resume and baseball play. And right now, that does not appear to be happening. What is happening, though, is the NBA. They have officially come to a decision that it will be a 22 team field with some regular season games followed by the playoffs, which will all start on July 31st. And then it will go through October 12th, which if you make it to the finals to October 12th, that would give the teams in the finals about a month or so in between the end of the finals and the start of the 2020-2021 season. The big thing that Woj has been tackling on Twitter is the issue of masks and whether or not some of the older coaches will be forced to wear masks. There are coaches like Greg Popovich, who's 71. You have Mike D'Antonio, who's 69. Alvin Gentry is 65. And they're throwing out the possibility that those three coaches and anyone else over 65 would be forced to wear a mask. And those coaches are not really taking that really well. And they're also saying now, Adam Silver's also saying that there's a possibility that the older coaches will not even be able to be on the bench. This is a quote from Alvin Gentry, head coach of the Pelicans. At the end of the day, they're the league. They're going to make the choice. I think it's unfair if that's what they're doing. I understand the risk that I'm taking if I do get it, but hell, I want to be with my team and do my job. That's what they hired me for. So it's very interesting kind of back and forth here. D'Antoni and Gentry both told ESPN they'd understand if every coach was required to wear a mask, but they don't believe they should be the only ones made to do so. So there's a lot going on right now. And there was also one team that voted no to the 22 team format. That was the Portland Trailblazers. We've heard Damian Lillard come out and say at times that he was not interested in continuing playing. He didn't feel like the risk was worth it. So interesting to see that the Blazers were the one no vote. One thing to note on the way this is formatted, this will end the career of Vince Carter. His final game, he came in, hit a big three right before all the quarantine stuff happened. The Hawks will not be in this 22-team field, so that will likely end the career of one of the NBA's greats and one of the longest tenured players in the NBA, and Vince Carter. So shout out to Carter and all that he has done for the NBA in his 20-plus year career, finishing it up with the Atlanta Hawks. Other than that, I think the big news is in college sports. The football teams will be able, or this is for Indiana, I should say. The Indiana football teams, or team, not plural, the football team will report June 15th. They will start bringing the team back for voluntary workouts. Men's and women's basketball are shortly after that, with some of the non-revenue sports coming in later in June and into July. The big story nationally is the Florida State Seminole football team is not reporting. There's been some disagreements with their head coach, and as of right now, there is a majority not reporting for the Florida State Seminoles, and they don't plan to do so in the immediate time frame. So that'll be something to watch for Indiana. Tom Allen has been very vocal about what's going on in our country, and the LEO mantra had been laughed at times. I think sometimes it was almost seen as a bit, but I've always thought it's completely genuine. Tom Allen loves his players. He loves who he works with. He loves his job. And you're seeing that now more than ever. And he's a guy that he comes out and he says this stuff, LEO, all this, and you know it's completely genuine because that is who Tom Allen has been for 3 years at Indiana. So it's no surprise that he is kind of gaining the support of the fan base of the players right now and making the right moves for Indiana football in this time frame. And basketball will obviously join up after that. The big watch for that is, can they get Christian Lander involved in maybe some of the offseason workouts, try and get him a little bit bigger? Because remember, he is technically a senior in high school. And when we had Dustin on the show, and he kind of said, look, we got to get him bigger. If he wants to kind of contend with a grueling schedule that Indiana may have this year with non-conference, the Maui Invitational, some road games in the ACC Big Ten Challenge, and the Gavitt games, and obviously the Big Ten schedule. So we'll see if they can kind of get that strength program up and running. And the final news, basically just a few other things. NASCAR continues to roll on. It seems to be pretty smooth for NASCAR right now. They're doing a couple of races a week. And then next week, the PGA Tour will resume. Golf is back on June 11th, a week from yesterday. So that'll be something to watch because they're going to have to test a ton of players. Internationally, the players most likely will not be coming back because if you live internationally, you have to quarantine for 2 weeks, then you can play. But then when you go home, you would have to quarantine for 2 more weeks. So if an international player is going to come over and play, they're going to have to stay here for a while. And that's a long time away from their family. So that's something to watch for. They also said, I believe it was yesterday, that players and caddies are not required to take the at-home COVID test, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I'm not really sure why that would be the case, but it seems like that's going to be something very interesting to watch for next week as golf comes back and as other sports start to come back. What are the testing protocols going to be for the NBA, the NHL, and all that jazz and all that good stuff? So we'll keep an eye on that as we go. That's kind of a wrap on today's headlines. We want to get back into what we've been doing this week, which is Student Media Appreciation Week. And for that, we have our next guest, and that is a man who is a rising junior at Indiana University. He covers IU athletics for the IDS News. He loves everything Washington, D.C. We're bringing in Matt Cohen. Matt, how are you?
I am doing wonderful. Thank you for having me on the show.
Well, I would say we miss Griffin, but we really don't because we have you here, and you
It's a big
spend
upgrade.
you spend enough time with Griffin. Just kind of talk about the opportunities you've gotten through the IU media program here in your 2 years, and kind of where you've grown since you arrived at IU.
Yeah. So I came in really, really eager to get started with just anything in sports coverage. I think I signed up for the IDS in like March of my senior year of high school, just wanting to get some semblance of things rolling. So I signed up then. I covered swimming and diving my freshman year, which was way more fun than I thought it was going to be. I watched swimming every 4 years in the Olympics, and never have watched it as much as I did in that 6 months of covering the team. But now I feel like I watch swimming all the time whenever it's on the Olympic channel, if you get that. But so that was fun. I've learned a lot there. I think it was a good opportunity. I think listening back to some of the previous episodes that you had, when you had Steph on a few days ago, he said that a lot of those smaller beats are kind of what you make them and the effort that you put into them. And he's really right about that. Like if you know, put your all into those smaller beats, like it's gonna pay off in the long run. I think that's you're talking about kind of growing, I guess, in my first 2 years. That's a huge jump from high school to even college swimming, which at IU it's kind of big, but it's not men's basketball, of course, but it's a good stepping stone to there to when I started doing football and men's basketball in my sophomore year, and felt way more prepared for that just because of spending so much time on a smaller beat and kind of working my I don't know if we're allowed to say ass on the show, but I'm going to anyway. Working my ass off for on that beat. And I think it paid off. I mean, I've definitely learned a lot from a lot of professors at IU. I can't even begin to. I would have to write a novel about all the things that I've learned there. It's been a great 2 years. I can't. I don't think there's enough positive adjectives I can use to really describe how much fun that I've had.
Well, if I remember correctly, you did put your all into that swim and dive beat. You traveled to, was it Texas?
Yes, I went to Austin by myself. That was one of my first ever, like, trips by myself. So, I left I think I skipped, like, 2, 3 days of class, went down there on a Wednesday, um, and my dad had a friend from work that lives, in Austin, Texas, so I somehow convinced the IDS to pay for my plane ticket, which was $500, and I don't know how I won that. Basically, I used the argument of you would have had to pay for the student reporters covering basketball to go to the NCAA tournament, but since IU didn't make the NCAA tournament, they were in the NIT, there were no travel costs, so and I don't believe we sent anyone to, Eugene for the women's tournament, so there was a lot of leftover money sitting around, so I said, "Well, why not send me to Austin?" And that somehow worked, and so I flew down there, stayed with my dad's friend, in his house in Austin, which was, I believe, like 2, 3 miles from, Baker Mayfield's high school. I think it's Lake Travis High School, so I didn't get to watch a game, of course, but I got to see one of those, hyped up Texas football stadiums, just really the real deal. And as things I remember from that trip, I remember kind of walking around Austin by myself, kind of just figuring out where everything was. I walked around the campus of a Texas by myself for a while. I snuck actually. I snuck into the football stadium. There was just an open gate, so I walked in. I couldn't get on the field, but I got pretty close. Um, and I recall also at the actual, pool itself, there were a bunch of, Purdue parents who asked me to take their picture, but at the time, I had not taken all my Indiana laptop stickers off, so they did not notice that I had all these Hoosier stickers on my computer, and then after I took their picture, the dad noticed my laptop and said, "Oh," like, was kinda joking with me, making sure I actually took, a good picture and wasn't, messing with that or anything. So that was fun to keep the rivalry going in a way down in Texas. But it was a good trip. It was fun to watch them on that national stage. Um, and I actually was kind of surprised. I think I was one of the only media members there. I mean, there was mostly SIDs. I don't think there was like the University of Texas didn't have a student reporter there, which I thought was weird because they have a big paper and they have a good team. I don't think there was much national news coverage at all. I was kind of surprised. Like it was ESPN was broadcasting it, but beyond that, I think I was one of the only newspaper reporters there, which was kind of weird to see for a national championship event.
Yeah, you certainly dove to pun intended. You dove headfirst into that beat. And how do you think that beat? You mentioned how Stefan
Mm.
was very adamant how those smaller beats make you better. How did that beat help you to where you are now, where you cover football, you cover basketball and baseball and some of the bigger sports at IU?
I mean, it was a huge stepping stone in that it kind of helped make the leap from high school to college because it's not, you have the room to fail there a lot more than you do on football and men's basketball, just because the stakes are a lot lower for that beat. And let's be honest, if you have like a fact there, for example, in a swimming article, you're the only one that's gonna know you're wrong besides the parents, to be completely honest. For a basketball story, if you have the score wrong, for example, or in my case, because I actually did this, had the I believe the date and the time of the game wrong in an article, you get called out mercilessly on social media, and it's a sick feeling because it's such a dumb mistake that you could have fixed very easily, but, you kinda get set up for it by working on some of these smaller beats and getting a sense of what it's like to work with an SID to cover. I mean, in my case, I had Lily King all year, so I kind of got some of that big spotlight with not. I mean, it's big-ish because Lily King's a pretty big name at IU, so it was cool to kind of get that star athlete, but not necessarily, but have so much more access to them. Like I got I can't even think of how many hours of interviews I was able to get with her, which is really cool because you don't really, you're never going to get Trace Jackson Davis for a half an hour sit down interview. It'd be nice, but it's just not going to happen. Um, you
Not
know,
for us.
I mean, like maybe Zach might, but beyond Zach, like I don't know, or if like ESPN came down for some feature, they probably would, but like no one else would. But to be able to get Lily King is like multiple time Olympic gold medalist, would have won more this summer, but will next summer whenever the Olympics end up being at this point. It's really cool to have someone like that that you can just say to the SID, "Hey, can I talk to this person?" And they'll say yes, and then you get that experience working with them, and by doing that, you kind of get to try out some new writing tactics, like ways to like open stories or close stories, or just put things together that are different than what you have made that you might see yourself doing in high school, and that helps set you up for the larger beats because you've tried all these new things, you see what works, see what doesn't, learn from professors and kind of gotten your feet under you, and then you're ready to walk into assembly hall. I think that a lot of you see some people that skip right to basketball doing it for some smaller like outside non-student media thing, and I don't know if they're necessarily ready for it. I think that having that small beat experience, I mean, you're not going to be ready to be in that assembly hall press room without having a press conference that's only you and the head coach, where you have to ask 7 questions because no one else is going to ask anything. There's a lot of people that don't get that. And I'm glad that I did. I think you can really tell the student media members who had that experience versus the ones who didn't have that experience.
That's fair, and we've talked about it all week about our own starts. I mean, I started on field hockey and then women's basketball, and have kind of worked through and still cover women's basketball. But the field hockey beat was huge because, like you said, you're the one asking the questions, and if you ask a bad question, you can tell from the coach's reaction, and you're like, all right, not going to ask that one again, and you just move on. But what have you been doing now? I mean, we were supposed to be spending March, April, May covering the baseball team, Little Five, and all that was obviously canceled. So, what have you filled your time with the past couple of months?
So I've been trying to just find something to cover. I've done some virus related stories, some just general stories to see kind of the things I didn't get to do during the school year because it was so busy. I also took some time, to relax. I think that a lot of us probably were gassed by the end of the year with all the, but between I think this kind of being my first cycle doing football and basketball, I was kind of gassed by the end of it. I needed a break. So I've taken a little bit of a break, kind of slowed down a little bit. I think I've only done like 4 or 5 or 6 stories since the school year, like since we were sent home, just trying to focus on some larger projects and not anything kind of more immediate. Um, and then I am starting on Monday. I am starting an internship with the Oregonian newspaper. So you talking about the Portland Trailblazers earlier. I'm gonna have to try to figure out what the hell's going on there. Um, and I start that on Monday. I'm working next week here in the DC area, and then I'm flying out there on Saturday, a week from today, and that's the rest of my summer basically. I do that, and then I think I'm coming back home for a few days and drive back out to Bloomington.
So you've got a very exciting summer coming
I'm,
up.
I got very lucky. I mean, there's a lot of people that I know got really screwed over by the buyers in terms of their internships, and I mean, it's I feel so bad because you were, I mean, you've been in this process. I mean, internships are so hard to get. There's a lot of stress involved, a lot of applications, a lot of rejections, and when you finally get something, I mean, I can't even imagine the feeling of having it and then having something completely out of your control take away your opportunity. I really feel very fortunate because I know so many people did not get this really good opportunity.
Well, before you get all into your Oregonian topics, let's talk a little IU athletics. You cover the football team, you cover the basketball team. We've had a lot of people talk about football this week, so I want to focus on basketball. The big news this summer was that Christian Lander reclassified, Trace Jackson Davis comes back, but now I feel like it's the transfer of Justin Smith. What does that do at first glance for the 2020 team?
Justin Smith's transfer is, I think, way bigger than a lot of people might think it may be. Because you know he has had, I think it's fair to say, his struggles at time. He's not always consistent. Archie Miller's talked a lot about him not always being locked in, but when Justin Smith is locked in, he's not going to score you 20 points. He did that one game against Michigan State, and I think it was 2 years ago now. That might happen. It's possible. He's talented enough to do that, but he will always, stuff the stat sheet. He's really good on both ends. He was IU's best. He was the best defensive player for sure for IU last season, and he does a lot of little things that might not always show up. He's a really talented player, and I don't know exactly how you replace that because you don't. IU doesn't really have a player that combines the ability to both score when he's locked in, to both score, rebound, and play defense. They just don't have that. You have Race Thompson, for example, who gives you the rebounding and the defense, but never really shown the scoring. Or you have Jerome Hunter, who can score, maybe can rebound, and can play defense, but we haven't seen that to be consistent. So there's not really a clear option to fill that spot. So I think you either are looking at some of those forwards like Race Thompson or Jerome Hunter, or maybe you play a 3 guard lineup, and that's how you get Christian Lander in the lineup. Which then you have the issue of you have no size at that point because you have Joey Brunk and Trey Jackson Davis as your only forwards, and then Rob Finney, Christian Lander, and Al Durham. And that team's going to be only be able, going to be able to rebound so well with basically just Trace Jackson Davis. And so there's not really a clear option that Archie Miller has, and I think that maybe may work because they have so much depth, so he'll constantly be using those rotations like he always does. No, I mean beyond Trace Jackson Davis, you're not really going to have someone who's going to play 30 minutes a game, which Justin Smith did lead IU in minutes last season. So maybe Trace Jackson Davis gets to fill some more of that void. There's definitely options. I don't think there's a clear good option. And I think that will kind of work itself out over the course of the season because there's going to be a combination that works. There's a lot of talent on this team. This team, even without Justin Smith, can still be top half of the Big Ten, but it's just figuring out which combination they need to be able to utilize that talent most effectively.
Well, I'll throw a couple things out there. I thought when Justin Smith was there was still a chance that the lineup could shift, not day one, but maybe at some point in the year two, because they don't have a ton of depth at the forward spot. And when I say forward, I don't include like a winger, like a Jerome Hunter. I think like big man. They could have moved to a Justin Smith, Trace Jackson Davis 4-5 and bring Joey off the bench. I'm not sure that's possible anymore unless you wanted to start Race at the 4 and Trace at the 5. So, I mean, this team, if you're thinking about it, this team has 3 bigs. I mean, where do they go? There's not a whole lot of options there down low.
There's really not. I mean, it's you get, I guess, Jordan Geronimo may have a little more playing time than you may have thought he may have had to begin with, but then you still have the issue of really in terms of your 5, you have Joey Brunk and I guess Ray Thompson can maybe play that, and Chase Jackson Davis can too, but neither of them are really clear 5s, and Joey Brunk is kind of a clear. I mean, I don't even think he's fine, I guess. I wouldn't say he's the best option out there. I like to consider myself to be the captain of the Race Thompson hype train. So I am all in favor of getting him some more playing time. I think he's not going to score, but he's effective rebounding on the defensive end. But you don't have depth right now, and that's why. I mean, Logan Duncan's going to be huge when he comes in next year, but then Trey Jackson Davis is probably gone,
and Joey Brunk
is gone as well. So there's not. You basically need to hope no one gets hurt, because if someone gets hurt, there's a big issue. And there's not. I mean, they have a lot of good guards at this point, but at the same time, there's a lot of unproven guards too. Like Al Durham's kind of inconsistent. Rob Finney has never really been a big scorer. I guess Christian Lander might be that big scorer, but there's no really way to know that because also he's right now too small to play in the Big Ten. And that could change. That's a weight room thing, and he's in a college weight room whenever he gets there. So I think there's just a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of talent for sure. There is some depth. I don't think it's as much depth as there was on this past year's team. Now that Justin Smith is gone, it's a really tough question because I don't think there's a clear answer to it.
Well, I lead the Jerome Hunter hype train. That's where I belong. So tell me how he fits with this team. Is he a potential starter now that Justin Smith is gone?
He might be. I think there's a lot of options for that extra spot, but he's certainly one of them. If he can make that jump that a lot of people have been talking about, because I think what kind of goes, I don't know if it's always forgotten, but not always as at the forefront is he was the top of that 2018 class before Romeo Langford committed. So he's clearly talented. He was the top 100 guy and got hurt, and he hasn't really ever fully recovered from that. And he's taking good steps to be back, but I don't think he's still at 100% yet. He might be there now, but I don't think he ever was truly at his best last season. But when we saw the flashes of Jerome Hunter, they were good flashes. And if he can find a way to string that together into any sort of consistency, he might be that guy. And he might. I mean, if he can produce some consistent scoring, especially from 3. I think he's a clear starter, but he just has to be consistent at that point.
All right, let's wrap it up like we wrap it up with everybody. Give me a moment, a memory, a quote, something that stands out to you from your 2 years so far. Obviously, you have a lot more memories to make in 2 more years, but something that stands out to you right now is like a whoa, that's like really cool that I got to be there type of thing.
To be completely honest, it was the last game that I covered. It was the IU versus Nebraska Big Ten tournament game. I know it's the most recent memory, but that was the most surreal environment I've ever been in for a game, especially when Hoiberg was taken off the floor for it was influenza, I believe is what they said that he had. But at that point we were in the first week of the coronavirus. I think Rudy Gobert, all that news had just come out that night while we were in the arena. And it was, I was sitting there just like staring at Twitter just explode on my laptop while this game that basically was meaningless at that point was happening. All the fans knew that this was going to be their last time there. I think a lot of people knew this might be the last college basketball game with fans for the whole year. I don't think people thought it'd be the last college basketball game, but I mean that feeling that people knew like there's a big thing about to change here, and even then, I don't think we knew. I I I look at what we've been through now and kind of use that to look at what we thought then. I don't think we even really had a good sense of what was going to happen in the next few months at that point. And but just being in the arena that night and watching, the Nebraska players get quarantined, IU not have their players come to the press conference, and just the complete, for lack of a better word, shock around the arena. What is about to happen to this country? It was a really weird experience, and I don't think there's going to be anything like that again. As I'm talking, the other thing that comes into my mind is the Bob Knight return. That was a really cool game to be at. It's something I'm gonna always remember, but I think that I think that because of what was going on in the outside world is why I'm more quick to answer the IU Nebraska game.
Isn't it funny how quick we are to forget about Bob Knight
But
because
yeah,
that game was so irrelevant? Indiana played so poorly. It
I
was
don't
like
know
a
what the score was at that game.
15-point loss. I honestly forget that that happened this year because everything that's happened. But that's a great one on the Nebraska game because, I mean, who thought though there was probably nobody, and myself included, I was sitting back in the studio and I was supposed to go to Indy for the Penn State game the next day. Myself included, never thought I would be making that trip.
Yeah.
And I expected to wake up and know that. And I woke up, they didn't say anything until 11:50, and it was just a bizarre day. So good choice there. Good insight into the life of a student media member for Matt Cohen. Matt, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for
Enjoy
having me.
safe travels out to Oregon. Enjoy your internship, and let's talk soon.
Will do. Thank you so much, Austin.
All right, take care, Matt.
Yeah.
Well, a great interview there with Matt Cohen, and let's bring in our next guest here. He runs the sports media program at IU, so it's only fitting that he comes on and he finishes out our student media program week here on Unpaid Interns. He's the director of the NSJC. He's also a fantastic griller. Galen Clavio joining us. Galen, how are you?
Oh, there we go. I'm
There it
unmuted
is.
now. So I'm doing okay. How you doing?
Doing great. How's quarantine been treating you? I mean, we were supposed to be at school for an extra 2 months. We were then home for that. You've been teaching online, trying to get Zoom shows going. What's it been like?
It's been a challenge, I think, as it has been for everybody, but it's been fine. I mean, I don't have a lot of major complaints. It's been disappointing to me because I haven't had a chance to interact with students very much, except online or on the phone, and yet, I think that I've tried to make the most of it by trying to get some work done. I've gotten a lot of work done around the house that I wouldn't normally have time for. I've got 2 young kids, and so they take up a lot of time, and it makes a different situation than it would have been otherwise. But yeah, I mean, I've been taking a lot of time to try to get caught up on reading and just trying to get caught up on what everybody else is doing. So it's been fun and not fun at the same time.
Well, we've been kind of taking a dive into the lives of some student media members this week. For you, when we are at school, what are you what's your job look like? What are you in charge of when things are normally happening?
Yeah, during normal times, and hopefully we get back to those at some point in the next year or two. What I do with the sports media program is really try to act as a coordinator and an organizer as much as anything else. I communicate with students about opportunities on campus to work in and around student media, work with professional organizations that are looking for part-time employees, communicate internship and job opportunities to people. And then I also get involved with, some more hands-on things. Like I work with the Big Ten Student U program. I schedule those broadcasts. I help to train and give feedback to broadcasters. And then I I teach a sportscasting class. I teach a social media and sports class in the summer. I teach a sports media literacy class. So there's a lot of different things that I do, and it's fun. It's a great time, and I get a chance to interact with a lot of students that are very energetic and a lot of fun to be around, and who are also very good at what they do.
Well, I'd say one of the biggest things I've noticed since my freshman year is the turnout for things like a call out meeting and the intro, like the intro meeting in August. What have you seen that's changed the most in your time at IU, or even just in the last 5 years with the sports media program?
Well, I think the biggest change is that there is an actual sports media program. 5 years ago, we're talking, summer of 2015, the media school had just come together. And for those who don't know the history of IU, we've had a lot of great people that have come through and have gone into the sports media field and have become very successful. And I was one of the people that came through IU back in the late 1990s, but there wasn't really a program. There were just like, you had your IDS writers over there, and you had your WIUS broadcasters over there, and there was no television station that students worked at, and it was very fragmented. And so one of the things we wanted to do when the media school got together was take all of those different elements and put them together and try to give a central identity to the program, and give people who had been here before when there wasn't a program the ability to come back and talk with students and have them all in one place and have them be easy to reach. And so that's been the biggest change, I think, is that people really do think of this as a program now. And it's great because, for me, that's where most of the strength in an academic situation comes from. It's from having a group of people come together. A lot of people, they'll argue, you go to Indiana University, there's 45,000 students there, you'll get lost in the shuffle. Yet that's not the case with our sports media program, because I feel like, the 300 or so people that we've got that regularly do things all have a pretty good idea of who each other are. Many of them end up rooming together. You end up working at various student media outlets together. And so I think that's probably the biggest change, is that that's become a lot more consolidated.
I can vouch for that. It was certainly like a fish swimming upstream as a freshman, but you start to figure out the fish around you, and I think that's certainly a strength of the program. What is kind of the outlook right now? I mean, what are you kind of seeing for the fall? There's so much up in the air. IU has come out and kind of tried to lay out some groundwork for it, but in terms of student media, I mean, where do you see things going in the fall?
I'm becoming increasingly optimistic with sports that we're going to have things to cover, and that we're going to at least have some kind of accommodation where we can figure out how to cover them. I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of questions with sporting events in general about, how many people are allowed in. Crowds may not be allowed in to smaller venues. It may be a fraction of the number of people that are allowed into the larger venues. It might be different for indoor versus outdoor sports and what's allowed there. But I'm becoming increasingly convinced that sports are going to happen in the fall. And I think that the momentum is really pointing in that direction. We're seeing, I think IU football is coming back for practices in June. And I think we're going to start to see that with other sports as well. So from that perspective, it might be a situation where not a huge amount changes, because what we focus on with this program is trying to get people out to cover events and then create content around the events that they cover. It's going to be different, and there's going to be some adaptations, but I think those adaptations are the same adaptations that are going to be happening with sports on the professional level. They've talked about this NBA startup in Orlando and how they might end up pre-selecting a certain number of media and having that be essentially the group that's embedded in Orlando with the players and the coaches and so forth. And so, I think every aspect of sports media from our level all the way up to the pro level is having to deal with these things. But I'm more and more optimistic that we'll be able to get back to work, so to speak, when fall semester rolls around.
It kind of feels that way, and it'll be interesting to see what process the media has to go through to go to events. But let's kind of take it back to your time at IU. You were in the broadcasting program. What are some of your fondest memories from your time at IU and some of the events you got to cover?
Man, I mean, it's funny. One of the things I've been doing this summer is finally going back and digitizing all my old broadcast tapes, and that I've been going through several games from football and from basketball, and I'm realizing there weren't a whole lot of really positive memories that I had from most of the things I covered. It was, I think, probably the most positive moments were the two championships that men's soccer won. I mean, those were both a lot of fun to cover, not just the games, but also everything going on around that. Certainly, I got to broadcast Little 500 my junior and senior years. I did the women's race broadcast on WIUS in 2000, and then the men's race in 2001. That was always a special memory, even though I went back and listened to the broadcast. I didn't do a very good job on either one. And then, I think, from the standpoint of basketball, there were some really interesting games there. There were some interesting football games. I always, for whatever reason, ended up getting stuck with the games that didn't end in buzzer beaters or didn't end in positive last second situations for IU. I remember I did a game in, I guess it would have been 1999. It was Indiana football at home versus Michigan. And that was a Michigan team that had Tom Brady as their starting quarterback, had Anthony Thomas as their running back. And IU was leading that game in the fourth quarter. They end up losing. There was a Hail Mary attempt by Antoine Randall that hit the receiver in the face mask and then bounced away as time expired. So that would have been great. But no, I think the most positive memories I have, though, are just the whole process of being able to call games and have that experience of being essentially right up there covering action of a major Division I program. And the whole setup even back then was one that was focused on giving students that kind of experience. And it's certainly something that propelled me into going into the field and doing it professionally for a few years after that.
Well, how have you seen the field change? I mean, this is obviously a ever-changing industry from the early 2000s when you graduated to now. What's the biggest difference?
The advance of social media and how it's just completely altered the landscape. I mean, when I was in school, I was a radio person, and you had us over on this corner, you had the newspaper people over on that corner, you had a few people that wanted to do television and they were over there, and there was no thought of combining those things. Like occasionally you'd have people that would do both, and I think the people that were really serious about working in the industry would do both, but it was almost as if they were in different countries. And, what's interesting to me, and I started to see this when I was working professionally. I remember I was doing hockey play-by-play in 2004. And one of the things I tried to do on the hockey broadcast was have like an open AOL instant messenger chat window that people could like send me messages during the broadcast. And that was like, wow, let's use the internet for something. This is weird. And, 5 years later, it was completely different. And then 5 years after that, it was completely different again. And now, when I teach students and when I try to structure experiences, so much of it is based around this idea of you really have to be conversant with not just writing, but also video, also podcasting. You have to be able to translate all that onto social media. You're far more public in terms of, right from the beginning, if you start covering a team or if you start broadcasting games, it's far easier for people to hear what you're doing, see what you're doing, read what you're doing. That puts a lot more pressure on students to be good early, but it also gives them a lot more avenues through which to be creative and get content out there. And so it's a double-edged sword. But by far, I think, the greatest thing and the worst thing is social media and the iPhone, because you can shoot in video quality that we wouldn't have dreamed of even 15 years ago. You can edit on software that would have cost you literally $2,000. All of that is in your hand, but the problem is you have to learn how to use it. And that ends up being the issue, I think, more than anything else.
Well, I'm going to give you a chance here to brag on your students. A really, really good finish for Mary Kate Hamilton in the STAA Awards for the Jim Nance Award. Talk about I guess we'll just single out her. What have you seen in her growth, and what does that say about the program itself to get somebody to place fourth?
It's outstanding. I mean, Mary Kate's been a tremendous part of the sports media program and the media school as a whole since she came here. I mean, I remember meeting her as a freshman, and she wanted to get involved. She got involved in a lot of different things. She was always looking for ways to get involved, and she was talented as well. And I think that's one of those things where the award stuff is important on the one hand, because it does give both her national recognition, and I think it gives the program some national recognition, and I'm pleased about both of those things. But to me, the award is less important than the example of, if you get involved early and you do things and you keep doing things, you're going to put yourself in a position not just to get recognized, but ideally to get a job as you leave or within the first few months after you leave, and then start your career off on the right foot, knowing what you need to do to have some degree of success once you're there. And I think if you look over the course of the last several years, we've had so many of our students that have come through the program be able to not just do that, but continue to climb up the ladder and be successful. And this is one of the things I tried to do as a professor in this area is communicate to my students, this is not an easy path. It's not an easy profession to get into. There's a limited number of jobs, and it seems like, every year something changes that makes the profession just a little bit harder to get into. So you really have to be of the mindset that you love doing this and you love the process of being a sports media person. And I think for our female students, Mary Kate's a great example of this, it can be very difficult because it's not a particularly friendly environment for women. We do our best to try to make it more accommodating, but I know professionally it's not a very friendly environment. And so even for our male students, it's a tough sled. So all of that put together, you end up in a situation where I'm immensely proud of any student that goes through the program, even if they decide at the end of it, this isn't what I want to do. I don't begrudge anybody that. I mean, I'm teaching now instead of actually being in the field. So, I'm certainly sympathetic to that. But I think if it's what you love and it's what you want to do, and you have a dual love of covering sports and doing media, this can be the most satisfying thing that you do. And we're lucky to have such talented people year after year after year coming in and wanting to do that. And I think Mary Kate placing fourth in the STAA awards is just an illustration of her dedication, but it's also an illustration of people that come in with that attitude, wanting to engage and do this sort of thing, what you can accomplish if you work hard for 4 years.
Well, what does the future look like for the IU Sports Media program and the talent that's coming in and maybe some fun things that are on the horizon for the program?
I think it's a tremendously bright future in that things continue to adapt and things continue to merge from a media perspective. And I think what we're seeing as we move forward is more opportunities for students every single year in a variety of different things. I think, we've had a lot of success with, students getting more opportunities in production and producing and more of the behind the camera sorts of things. That is as big of a growth area as any in the business, because there's a finite number of on-air jobs, there's a finite number of jobs where you're writing and getting paid for it, but content is such an important thing. And there's so many video streams, there's so many leagues and conferences and individual teams that are trying to put their own stuff out there, that if you know how to edit video, if you know how to sit in the producer's chair or the director's chair, that's going to give you opportunities professionally that you might not have thought of. I mean, a lot of times what I do with students is just open their eyes to the possibilities outside of what they've seen. Everybody sees the play-by-play broadcaster or the sideline reporter. They don't see the 20 people that aren't on camera that are making that possible. And so, that area, podcasting, I think we've had tremendous growth in podcasting over the last few years. That was part of the idea behind this show when we talked about it was,
You're on one right now.
Yeah, let's do a video show and let's do podcasting at the same time. And it's like, I want to see students doing more and more of that, because I have a belief that, I can teach you some things in class. I can give you some feedback, but to me, so much of this business is about repetition, and it's about, getting the practice over and over again. And podcasting is great because you don't have to book a studio. I mean, you're sitting in your bedroom right now doing this. I'm sitting in my home office, and you've got the capacity now to create your own media, to do it over and over again, and to really get good at it through that process. And I think that if I can, help give you the spark to get something moving in that direction, if you can have the inner drive to do something like that, you have the possibility of building your own empire. And so to me, that's what's exciting about it. Like, we've got a lot of really talented students coming in every year from all over the country. One of our best freshmen this year is from California. It's like the number of people who are starting to learn about this program that are really good already and coming in from the high school level with a lot of experience, it just grows and grows every year. And that ends up raising the bar for everybody, because you're able to come here and not just be good by yourself, but work with a lot of talented students. And I think that makes you even better. And so that is really what excites me as much as anything else.
Do you have a favorite moment that has stood out to you since you've become a professor, since you've kind of started running the sports media program? I know we talked about your memories as a student, but what about at the head of the media program?
I mean, I think the most fun time that I've had was, and this was before you got here, unfortunately, but
you're not having any fun while I'm there? Dang.
No. I'm saying I've had a lot of fun since you've gotten here, but I think the moment that still stands out for me, it was actually a whole week, which we ended up calling Sports Media Week as it was happening. And during this week, we had Bob Ryan, the longtime columnist and reporter for the Boston Globe, come in and speak to our classes. We had Katie Nolan Skype in to the sportscasting class, and I ended up hosting a panel at the Wittenberger Auditorium that featured Eric Shanks, who's the president of Fox Sports and an IU alum, and Mark Cuban, who's, of course, the owner of the Dallas Mavericks and an IU alum, about sports media and technology. And so, for all of that, it was very random that it all happened in 1 week in February back in, I think, 2016. But it was just like a roller coaster from start to finish in a positive way. Like, there was never like a moment where you felt bad about what was happening. It was a lot of work, but it was a lot of fun. We had a bunch of random stuff. Other stuff happened during that week. Chad Millman, who at the time was the editor of ESPN.com, ended up being in town, and it was like him and Bob Ryan sitting at a table with like 8 or 9 IU sports media people talking. It was just a lot of fun all the way around. So that one sticks out to me as much as anything else. But there have been so many great moments. There's been so many great, situations, watching kids broadcast, seeing our students get awards and get recognized. I mean, you just had Matt Cohen on, who got recognized for that tremendous piece that he wrote about Bob Knight coming back to Bloomington. It's hard to, every time I think of one, I think of another. And then I end up just, talking about them in chain, and it takes forever for me to get through them. So it's been a lot of fun. And I think, watching what our students do on a day-to-day basis is its own kind of fun. And it's like, you almost hate to single out one moment, because that leaves out a bunch of other great moments.
Well, that's always the sign of a good program, and also the sign of a good program, or the growth of the program, that you said there were 8 to 9 students with Bob Ryan in 2016. There's no way you could keep that to 8 to 9 students now.
That was the number that we could find, and also that we're old enough to get into Knicks.
That's fair.
That was the big issue more than anything else.
Well, thanks for hopping on with us. Thanks for all that you do for the IU Sports Media program. And it was only fitting to wrap up our appreciation week with the man who runs the program. So thanks, Doc, for joining us, and let's talk soon.
Thanks so much, Austin. Have a great one.
All right, you too. Great week. Really, really happy with the way that this week turned out. I want to thank all of our guests, Stefan Krajnik for coming on, Drew Fry, Jared Rigdon, Haley Jordan, Matt Cohen, and Dr. Galen Clavio, for all that they do in our sports media program, and myself and our host Tamar, Connor, and Griffin, who wasn't able to come on today with internet issues, but you'll see them all throughout the summer. Thanks to Dr. Clavio for giving us the opportunity to have this show. It has been an absolute blast so far. We have Monday's guests lined up, and they are two really good guests. I'm really excited about that. We'll keep you in suspense for those, but just we're excited about the direction of this podcast, and I hope that you are as well. But I want to take the final couple of minutes here to talk about my experience in the media school. I was a high schooler who had a ton of experience, and I was fortunate enough to go to a high school with a broadcast program. But I wanted to challenge myself, and that's what Dr. Clavio said. You can't get better without having those around you that are fantastic. And IU has given me that opportunity. I'm surrounded every day by really talented broadcasters and writers and journalists and podcasters and reporters and all the greatness that is in the IU Media School. We're finally starting to kind of see that ramp up. Like Dr. Clavio said, it was kind of during my years of visiting the school as a high schooler that the media school is being built. And I've been fortunate enough to have it all 3 years at IU and see the growth. And I'm not kidding. I mean, the call out meetings have nearly doubled in size in the 3 years that I have been. When you go in August to all the call out meetings for the student media programs, it has blossomed incredibly. People are just so interested. And like he said, people coming from out of state that now know the program. And that's part of the growth of a program, is getting people outside of Indiana to acknowledge that it is a program on the rise. So I'm extremely thankful for Dr. Clavio and all that he has done and all the opportunities that he gives us, including this podcast right here. And I'm really glad that we got to highlight some of the great people, but obviously outside of Stefan, Drew, Jared, Haley, Matt, and there's so many more. And besides us as hosts as well, and the seniors that graduated and the people who have come before us, this program has had a ton of talented people. And just by talking to 5 of them this week and having 4 of us as hosts, just the 9 of us is nowhere near the amount of talent that is in that program. So obviously we can't have everyone on from the student media program unless we did that all summer, which would be fun. But we just wanted to highlight a few of the stories, but know that there are many other stories in the media program and in Franklin Hall. And I look forward to getting back to something normal and something close to normal this fall, and getting to see my fellow journalists and reporters, and getting, like Galen said, to have that community together again, covering sports. So again, thanks to all the people who came on this week. Thanks for those of you along for the ride. It was a really fun week. We'll be back to kind of talking to the professionals in the field next week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, again, 11 a.m. We will have a couple of really good guests. I guess I'll just tell you who's coming on Monday. We've got Ted Emmerich of Westwood One and ESPN. He covers college sports and also the Masters. We'll just kind of be talking fun stories with Ted and trying to pick his brain of what he's been through. Obviously, you get to go year after year to Augusta National. You're going to have some stories. He also covers high school sports for ESPN. So we'll talk about some of the top high school athletes he's seen in some of those events. And we'll have Chris Solomon of No Laying Up, the golf podcast, joining us. He has an immense amount of contacts in the golf world. And as golf starts up next week, I couldn't think of a better person to pick the brain and try and figure out where he's at and where he thinks the game is at as it tries to come back next week at Colonial. So some really good guests on Monday. We'll have plenty more on Wednesday and Friday as well. Again, we are on podcasts wherever you get your podcasts: Spotify, Spreaker, Apple Podcasts. We are there. Unpaid Interns 3 times a week. We are also live on YouTube Monday, Wednesday, Friday, normally 11 a.m. Eastern time. So for now, that'll wrap things up for today's episode. Make sure you can check out our podcasts. This one will be coming out here shortly. But thanks again for joining us this week. We'll see you next time on Unpaid Interns.